even love. It was really evident that you had some research behind you in the way you were thinking about representing these sorts of things in the characters. Do you feel like that contributed to the development of these characters with these issues?
Massively.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to unpick exactly how, but yeah, definitely. It gave me, I think it's given me a lot more certainty in how I want to go about portraying grief and trauma and relationships and the kind of complexity that sits in those spaces. And one thing that I was really certain about going in is that I wanted there to be a trauma that was never articulated. And I'm assuming I can give spoilers because people have read the book, which is so exciting. So with Darcy's story, I really wanted him to never actually articulate what he had been through. And as readers, you can sort of piece it together and you can sort of pick up the other characters piecing it together and realizing what's happened to him. But I really wanted that to be in the book, and that was definitely influenced by the work that I did in the trauma space, because I think often in fiction, and I've definitely done this with my other books and I love reading it, but there's kind of a character's behaving a certain way and there'll be a traumatic backstory that's kind of dangled at the start, and you want to know what it is. You want to understand them, you want to know what they've been through, you want to know why they're behaving the way they are, and you keep reading and it builds up towards this climax where they tell the story of their trauma to another character, and it's this moment of catharsis and connection. And I think often in real life people aren't able to articulate their trauma, even to themselves, let alone others, and that doesn't mean that they can't be seen and held and nurtured. And I really wanted that to be in the book.
Yeah, I think that comes across really strongly. What did others think about that? The whole idea that Darcy's trauma is never really quite articulated, and we, as if we're a bystander, we need to try and piece that together and support him through this narrative without totally putting our finger on what's happened. Although we can surmise what's happened, but it's never really articulated. How did that feel?
I thought it was very realistic.
Very realistic, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The picture's so beautiful, so what could possibly be going on?
Yeah, interesting, yeah. Did you hear that comment? Are you able to hear?
I didn't hear the last one.
Sure. Just the fact that he was so beautiful and came across so confident, and like what could have possibly gone wrong? Yeah. The assumptions that we make about people that we encounter, that what could have gone wrong. Yeah. Now, before we jump further into this book, oh yes.
Beautiful people really recognise themselves as such.
Oh, interesting point. And that was very true for Darcy. My nana just said, my nana's here. Yeah, she comes.
That's awesome.
My nana just said that beautiful people seldom recognise themselves as such, and we do see Darcy wrestle with that. He doesn't know how to view himself. He doesn't know what he not physically looks like, but how he is perceived, and he kind of feels. Does he feel invisible? I don't know. He kind of feels. Does he feel irrelevant, or what is it that Darcy's feeling?
Sorry?
Does Darcy, because he's quite perplexed by how others respond to him, yeah. And I just was saying, does he feel a bit invisible, or does he feel a bit irrelevant, or what do you think he's feeling?
I think he's oblivious.
Oblivious?
Yeah. Because he's just so focused.
Held in his trauma, do you think? That's kind of blocking how he's seen.
I think he's quite happy to be in the shadows because he doesn't want anyone to realise that something's happened.
Okay, he's happy to be in the shadows because he doesn't really want people to realise that something could have happened. Just before we progress further unpacking this book, see, we loved it so much, we just want to get straight into it. But I would like to ask, what kind of authors did you enjoy reading when you were a child?
I read really, really diversely. So I read a lot of my mum's crime novels that I'd snaffle off her bookshelf. So I read Patricia Cornwell. I read Stephen King when I really shouldn't have been.
Yeah.
Read a lot of fantasy. Uh, read a lot of kind of horsey books. I mean, I just devoured everything I could get my hot little hands on, really.
I read your article in The Guardian about the relationship that people have to pets and grief and grieving.
Ah, yes.
Saw that beautiful photo of you with your horse who's now passed, but you had that horse for 20 years or something, didn't you? A really long
I
time.
had him for a really long time. Yeah, I still miss him.
Yeah, what was his name?
Check.
Check, that's right.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you grew up in the country?
I actually grew up in the outskirts of the city, so kind of inner southeast of Melbourne, and I have incrementally kind of clawed my way out. And my mum was horsey, and she kind of facilitated my horse riding, and it was something that we shared and did together. And the horses were kept on other people's properties, but which was I was so lucky to have that opportunity, and I just love it.
And you've managed to go back out into the countryside now.
Yes,
And
yes.
you have a flower farm, is that right?
Yeah, it's just a little side.
Yeah.
It's like a little side business, but it's a lovely way, I think, to kind of counterbalance writing and just being in my head so utterly,
Yeah.
and just being able to then go outside and ride my horse, or
Yeah.
go and plant seeds, or harvest flowers for a florist, or swear at slugs. It's just it's a really nice kind of juxtaposition there between those two things.
How big is your flower farm?
It's really little. We're on about 8 acres all up.
Yeah, yeah. And you have a horse on your property?
3 horses on the property, 1 horse somewhere else.
Yeah, okay, wow. Oh, that's awesome. So yeah, okay. So the flower business is a little bit of an outlet for you outside of writing, because you do find that as an author, do you get very all consumed into your projects?
Absolutely. And I mean, I had my son at around the same time that I started writing Salt and Skin, and I had to relearn how to write, because prior to that, I always just wrote in really big, luxurious chunks. Even when I was writing around work in the drug and alcohol sector, I'd be able to kind of, come home from work and I could just write, or on the weekends, I could just write if I wanted to. And with a small child, you don't get those unbroken chunks. So I've had to relearn how to do that. And I think part of that is being able to dip in and out of the flowers and the outside work, and kind of just find ways of balancing the writing and segueing into the writing. And it's...
Yes, okay. Yeah. So do you have any writing rituals?
I listen to a lot of music.
Yeah. What kinds of music do you like to listen to when you're writing?
I listen to a lot of orchestral stuff, bit of classical stuff. Sometimes I listen to just kind of like pop rock, and it helps me find a rhythm in the words, I think. And and that's probably my only ritual. Like I write anywhere. I mean, I write on my phone if I have to. I'll scribble on bits of paper, or I'll be on the couch or in my glass house when my baby was really young and noisy and I needed a quiet spot to read and write. But yeah, that's just music.
Yeah. Do you know something, and I feel so lucky with this, at home I play in the background all the time because I have 2 cats, and I read somewhere that classical music is very soothing for cats. So I have a radio that just on 24/7 on the classical radio channel. And when I was finishing your book, this most dramatic piece of classical music came on. And as it was coming, all of the drama of this big ending was supported by, it wasn't Tchaikovsky, I don't know, there was Tchaikovsky or something. There were big drums. It was all very, very dramatic. It was awesome. So I highly recommend that. I'm going to revisit this book, put a bit of classical on, especially at the ending. It really carried me through that. Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it was great. It was just such good timing. So, so you always knew you wanted to be an author then? So right from being a young girl, the seed was planted and you were recording stories. I think I read somewhere that you finished your first manuscript at 8. Were you about 8? Or...
I started writing shorter stories about 8. I finished my first kind of 80,000 word manuscript when I was 14. And then I wrote a manuscript every year from 14 to 24 when I signed my first book deal.
Geez, remove those air quotes because that's not actually 80,000 words. That's problematic. Wow, that's awesome. And so your first book was that wasn't in the quiet, was it?
Yeah.
Was
yeah.
It quiet?
Yeah, that was my first book.
So what made you decide to write in the quiet? What was your inspiration for falling into that?
I'm not actually sure. It was I was actually started writing it in Western Australia. I was doing a residency at the KSP Centre, Captain Stunner Pritchard, and I had finished the story that I had got the residency for, and I was on like my final day or last couple of days, and I just had this blank Word document and I just started writing. And it's pretty much word for word the first few pages ended up in the book. And it was such a unintentional story, and it just kind of poured out. Like it was quite a intuitive process writing that story.
So you knew what you wanted to say. Is that?
Yeah, like I knew it was moving towards her kind of, spoiler, but her kind of disappearing and her family going to be okay, even though they were altered and changed. It would always have that absence.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's such a contrast to Salt and Skin, which was such an intentional work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't been asked that in the quiet for ages. It's a blast from the past.
yeah. So, what inspired you to write Salt and Skin then?
I went on a trip to the Orkney Islands after a friend sent me Amy Liptrott's memoir, The Outrun, which is set largely on the Orkneys, and it's around addiction. And my beautiful writer friend, Sandra Lee Price, sent it to me because she thought I'd be interested in the addiction side of things. But loved that, but just the way she evoked landscape, I just decided I had to go there.
Yeah.
And dragged my husband there in the nearing winter. And I normally like really mild, kind of tropical, lush places. And, we arrived, couldn't get the door of the hire car open. And my husband's just like staring at me over the roof of the car being like, why did you want to come here? Like he was happy. Why are we here? And we did all the sites. So there's Scarra Brae, which is this amazing, I think it's over 5,500 years old. I could be wrong about that, but it's very old ruins. And one of the sites that we visited was St Magnus Cathedral, and it's this beautiful church that's still operational in Kirkwall. And they began constructing it in 1137, and basically that is what I based the kirk on in Salt and Skin. And there is actually a dungeon in there. So there is that hole in the wall where they used to incarcerate those accused of witchcraft in the 17th century. There's the hangman's ladder.
Yeah.
And something about being confronted with the physicality of the dungeon and the fact that, these terrified people, and 90% of them were women in the Orkneys, would have been dragged from often really remote areas, remote islands in the Orkneys, and just put in this hole overlooking this church. And, worship would have been going on around them, and, weddings and funerals and christenings.
So they was just imprisoned within the wall, and life is going on around them, and they're just, wow.
And how do you make sense of that? And I wanted to write about that, and I wanted to compare Australia and Orkney, and I was really fascinated by the women's stories and how we like to think that we've evolved so far beyond that kind of violence and vitriol and fear and othering. And I wanted to explore in Salt and Skin that those patterns are still perpetuating, they kind of morph shape, but that we still enact so many of those horrifying patterns. And how can those patterns be broken? It's kind of what I wanted to explore. And I started writing Salt and Skin, I mentioned before, when my son was really small. And normally when I get an idea for a story, I'm just straight into it. I have no willpower. As soon as I have a bright, shiny idea, I'm there.
Yeah.
And because I had this newborn, and he was a very screaming newborn,
Oh, bless.
I physically could not get to my laptop. So I just kept thinking about this story, and it just got bigger and bigger and bigger until I just couldn't find my way into it. And I ended up writing it as a poem, 4,000 word poem on my phone, like 3 a.m. or something. And the shape of the story changed hugely over the editing process. I think it's 100,000 words, and I ended up editing out about 150,000 words. But the end scene, which is proving quite divisive, is almost.
Yeah, we were. Yeah.
You know what? My neighbor, she read it. She's beautiful. I got this text message from her at like midnight, all in capitals, telling me that she had just finished my book and I had ruined her life, and demanding an epilogue for her 50th birthday.
I don't know if you're aware of The Sopranos, but it reminded me of that cut to black at the very last episode season. The Sopranos, and they decided to just cut it to black so you don't know. And I felt like that, even though there's a lot going on. It's not that you haven't given us the information, but it does just end. But I think that's a really interesting thing, and we were talking about this earlier, and I wondered, is that because some of these themes, the magic and the mythology surrounding these women and the witchcraft and all of these intense emotions and things, they are, and you feel them really intensely, but there's no ending to that. Oh, I'm not articulating myself very well. Who can help me? But do you kind of know what I mean? That these sorts of things don't require closure or an ending.
There's a sense of continuity. You feel as though you have been a bystander during these stories that are being told, and you get the sense that as a reader, as a bystander, you step back and you continue onwards, just like the paths of history that are explored throughout climate change as well.
Exactly, and I think we were talking about that before, the parallel of climate change. That is something that's catastrophic, it's urgent, it's here, it's real, but we don't know how to solve it. Or, we've got ideas, but it's not being solved. And like these sorts of things happening with the socio-cultural aspects happening in this book, they're there, they're real, they're urgent, but they're not solved. It's because they continue on. Is that, I'm running a bit. Lisa said it a bit better, but do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What made you want to parallel focus on climate change as well?
I was interested in the parallels between witchcraft and the witch hunts and climate change, and this idea that both have a kind of, in some ways, a vaguely similar impact on communities and well-being, and how it taps into that fear of something huge and destructive existing in your world and impacting you and the people that you love. And I was also very struck by some of the accusations leveled against the people accused of witchcraft in the Orkneys, and one of them that really stuck out for me was promising fruitfulness in nature. That was a real charge against one of the women, and I was like, how wild is it that you had these often incredibly disenfranchised, disempowered women living often on the fringes of society, but they were thought to have these huge powers over life and death and the weather and the landscape and just the world. And I just thought that was really wild, and I wanted to write about it.
Yeah, and it's as you say, it's intense, and the parallel of the emotion behind these two things and the impact that they have on the community. So, what was your favourite part of research for this book? Because you've got some big themes happening there: climate change, domestic violence is one, substance abuse, I suppose, with the alcoholism of is it? Do you say theophin or teophin? How do you say it?
Theophin in my head.
In your head, theophin? We've also got, loss, love, huge things. So there's a lot of research that must have gone into this book. What was your favourite part of all of this different research?
I mean, I didn't do a huge amount of research into the grief and trauma and substance abuse and sexual abuse and all of that, particularly because I sort of during the studies and clinical work, I've sort of done a lot of work in those spaces already. The most challenging part was deciding how to kind of balance writing about a real place that I didn't belong to and what liberties I could take and all of that sort of thing. My favorite thing that I researched, I loved finding out about the apotropaic marking, so the witch marks.
Yes.
And they're actually in Australia as well, which I was really startled by, because it's basically the Witchcraft Act of 1735 largely marked the end of a lot of kind of occult practices in that part of the world. And, colonization didn't occur in Australia until 1788. So there was a gap of quite a number of decades. And it was pretty much accepted that there weren't going to be any witch marks in Australia. And then a researcher, Ian Evans, I think he's based in Tasmania, could be wrong about that, but he started research in Tasmania and has since spread to the mainland of Australia, and he's found all of these examples of protective magic throughout Australia. And there is protective magic in the Orkneys, there's protective magic in St Magnus Cathedral. And I read this story when I was procrastinating over something and just going through news sites, and there's a place near Sheffield called the Creswell Crags, and it's this cave network, and there's all of these carvings inside, and everyone kind of thought they were just Victorian graffiti, and teenage boys have wandered in on a rainy afternoon and just hacked away and had a merry old time and nicked off back home. But someone then worked out that actually no, these incredibly heavily graffitied sites were examples of protective magic, and they were done in such abundance in this cave network that one theory is that they thought that it was the gateway to hell, and they were trying to keep the devil and the demons and the bad spirits locked safely away from the human world. And I was just very interested in all of that. And I was very interested in the ways that, the people that colonized, invaded Australia reverted back to those old practices when they were confronted by the unfamiliar, and how that plays into this repetition of trauma and fear and all of that across generations and centuries and decades.
What was your least favourite aspect of research then?
I haven't been asked that before. I'm trying to decipher the Kirk records written in the 1700s is pretty wild.
Yeah.
That was a challenge for me. And I mean, it's not strictly research, but trying to pull together Salt and Skin into a cohesive timeline was a bit of a rat bag of a job.
Yeah. Well, you did a really good job. I did think that reading it, there was just so much going on, and you've staggered it across 3 years, but you did a really good job. It works out.
Thank you.
Something that I noticed in this book, and I wonder if anyone else noticed it, I found it deeply, deeply refreshing that even though the central protagonists are adolescents, we're not being assaulted with their texting and text messages the whole time. I found that really refreshing. I think there's like one mention of a phone later in the book, and Darcy throws it and breaks his phone. Recently, I went to a talk with Holden Shepherd, who's a WA author here. I don't know if you know Holden, who wrote The Brink. And in his recent book, he talked about the fact that he planted all of his teenage characters, because he's a YA author, on an island where they had no reception. He didn't feel like he could authentically write about that experience of how teenagers use tech. And that really stuck with me, because it's true, I've got teenage brothers and I don't know what the hell they're talking about half the time. So I wondered, is this something, what motivated you to leave tech out of this book? Because it's not, like the time, it's fairly nowish, isn't it, the timeline of the book. So what made you decide to leave tech out of it? I know that they are on the island of, is it Shawnee? Shawnee, sorry. I imagine, with it going on there, there's not great reception anyway, but what was that, a conscious decision to avoid that, or did your characters just not cry out emoticons to you?
Cry out emoticons. That's amazing. I think I did, when I realized that I wanted it to be set very much contemporary and have because climate change has been ongoing for quite a long time, obviously, but when I knew I wanted it to be really kind of even slightly into the future, and that, there would be that technology. There was a couple of drafts I did that did lean more heavily on it, and it just felt bulky and unnecessary. And I just went, F it. I've taken so many liberties with this book and have deviated so wildly from realism that I just unapologetically decided that they wouldn't be really into tech in this vaguely parallel universe where there's witches and selkies and ghosts.
Well, it works. They're all really connected to the environment that they're in, which is great. There's no time for tech because they're out swimming and diving to the bottom of the ocean and throwing things off cliffs. So that was really great. I really liked that part. Which characters spoke to you first?
Darcy and Theo.
Yeah.
Luda too, but she was so tricky for me to pin down as a character, and she was probably the character I worked the hardest on during all the drafting and the editing processes, because and I don't know whether I succeeded, but just trying to strike that balance between her being a challenging, complicated woman who's difficult, and how we're not very good at sitting with challenging, difficult women in fiction often. And so striking that part of her character with still having elements of her that were resonant and hopefully you still engaged with and kind of connected with. So she was hard. But yeah, Darcy and Theo were probably the characters, and Tristan was a bit of a later addition, but he just like trotted himself out pretty late in the writing process, fully developed, and just slotted himself in.
Yeah, well, he seems a pretty adaptable chap, doesn't he? Yeah, I actually fell in love with Tristan. I thought it was good. A few of us did, yeah. He was great. Oh, the scars. Where did the concept for the scars come from? Because that was fabulous.
It's just something I've sort of daydreamed about before. I think I was watching the series Heroes, like, I don't know, 15, 16 years ago or something ridiculous like that. And there's one of the characters heals whenever she gets injured and there's no mark. And I was thinking, that's interesting. What would it be like if we had every single mark on our skin, and what would that tell the world about our story and who we are, and how would it change how we are in the world? And I think skin is kind of fascinating, and scarring is kind of fascinating, and how it relates to the protective marks and the marks in the stone, and how it relates to that juncture between what's human and what's the natural world, and where that sits. So, and I kind of tossed up briefly, because there's so much going on in Salt and Skin, and I thought, oh, should I try and take this out? Is it too much? But I really loved having it in there, and I had a lot of fun writing the scars.
I think it's a truly poetic aspect, and it really, I'll be with you in a sec, Patty. It's a really poetic aspect, and it's another dimension of looking at trauma, and kind of another way to relate to these characters, and view their, the culmination of who they are and what they've been before they came up the island. What was your question, Nana Patty?
I was fascinated by the scars because I'm 80-year-old now. When I was going through menopause, scars that I had as a child came up.
Ooh.
And I could see them.
Were you able to hear?
Wow.
From here, from barbed wire, and another one on my knee from glass, and they came up. I showed them to my kids, and they're gone again now.
Wow.
So, Nana Patty studied did pathophysiology. So come on, Nan, why do you reckon your scars came back like that? Is that
hormones through menopause? But it gave a basis of truth.
Yeah.
To what they're saying.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so it gave a basis of truth to your extension of the scars, revealing them.
That's cool.
Cool. Yeah,
it's very cool.
I showed my kids; they could see them.
Wow.
Scars, but yeah, during that menopause period, 4 or 5 years, they showed up again, and now they've
subsided.
Didn't we hear about?
Yeah. Yep.
Who had no scars?
Theophan had no scars. That's interesting.
Was he innocent in that case, or was it just because he was otherworldly?
Yeah. So is the comment being made about Theophan and him having unblemished and no scars on his skin? Is that talking to his innocence, or because he's kind of unworldly in a bit of the other?
I kind of felt like it was because he'd shed his skin, because there's that whole sulky origin story sitting there.
Like that, yeah.
But also, I think it's Darcy that says maybe he's got more scars than anyone, and that Darcy describes him as being quite luminous, and whether every part of him has been scarred for other reasons.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Did you always know that they were going to be in love?
No, I didn't really set out to write any romance into this story. And I was just busily beavering away writing all the other parts of it. And then they just every time they interacted, they just had so much chemistry and tension. I was like, no, they need to be together.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed as well, I think, giving, like a mother who lost her husband, she has her happy ending. And Darcy and Theo get their happy ending, and Min, who is, the young girl full of vitality, she has that kind of beginning of the romance arc, and then basically just tells him to sod off.
Yeah. But her romance is finding herself in the ocean. Like she's had quite an interesting love story, I suppose, with place. Like at the end of it, and I think she's speaking to Theophan, and she says, I belong here, you belong here, but Darcy doesn't really belong. He's never really belonged, but she's come to this island and she's found who she is. And there were a lot of love stories going on in this book. That relationship, exactly. That that it's can be platonic love story as well. Like, so can you unpack a bit for us the relationship between Cassandra and Min, and what kind of inspired you to create this connection between these two, you know, different generations coming, you know, kind of, it's quite far removed, the family connection between them, isn't it? It's like third cousins.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, Cassandra, it's actually hinted at in the story that Cassandra was the one witch that didn't get executed back during the witch hunts.
So she's 100 million years old. Yeah, we were talking about that. I think Sally was saying, is Cassandra 400 years old? And Sally, she is. Cassandra.
Well, I think she is.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that makes so much sense. Penny dropped. Yeah. So, all right, can we talk more about their relationship? Or just how you came to, how these two came to be so connected, because it's massive. It's very, a lot kind of is in the orbit of these two women, I think.
I'm very interested in those kind of transgenerational relationships where you've got someone who's older really connecting with someone who's quite young in a family, and how powerful and deep and loving and how rich those relationships are. So I wanted to explore that, but yeah, Cassandra was a bit of a later addition as well, actually, and she was kind of like Tristan. She just kind of added a bit of warmth and levity and linchpinned the rest of them together. But I think it also just comes back to that idea of these patterns repeating and this idea of time kind of breaking down. And yeah, I mean, I haven't really thought about that much. I probably shouldn't I?
So, because a lot of the, was that a hand that was? A lot of the magic that's going on in this book is talked about and never really contextualized or explained away, and that's really quite beautiful. But what made you decide to not explain it all away, or try to rationalize it, or try to tether it to too many things? What made you decide to approach writing the magic?
I think I wanted to use the magic to explore these ideas that are almost too big for realist narratives in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Trauma, climate change, abuse. They can be so hard to pull into a realist narrative, and they can be. And, obviously people live those things and in their real lives, but in terms of fiction and crafting something, I wanted that magic to play into that, and I guess kind of give voice to things that are hard to illustrate in more straight realism, or hard to illustrate in that way. And also it was fun for me to write.
Yeah.
It was fun. And, I loved pulling in the Selkie folklore for Theo, and I loved pulling in the ghosts and, and the witchcraft, and it was fun for me. And, I worked on this story for 3.5 years, so the fun was pretty important.
Yeah, exactly. How do people find reading the magic, alongside something as scientific and serious as climate change?
I actually really resonated. I don't know why, with Iris, because she continued to protect herself and try and keep herself that far removed from what she grew up watching her mum do, almost. She's very into the priest, so she's trying to be a good Christian girl, but she's remembering all the spells and the things they used to do with her mother.
And she's a massive cause as well, isn't she?
Yeah. And her story arc really actually all through the book spoke to me about. I started off thinking Iris was just one of those town
gossipy.
She said, Theo, why did she take him in? This whole thing, and at the very end, she's finally finding herself and letting herself say those protective spells for Linda.
Yeah.
Which is in the whole, and that's the whole sort of arc of who are you, Iris?
Were you able to hear that, Eliza?
I could hear bits of it, but why Iris sort of took Theo in and who she is?
Yeah, she was
my oldest daughter, and you don't really, it says in the very sort of thingy that they pushed Iris out the window, so she
to save,
I think, those witches. But so when did all this die?
And was Cassandra pushed out the window as well, wasn't it? Cassandra and Iris both saved.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the way that Iris says she grew up walking with her mum and watching her mum collect these things.
So she knew all these
things. And it doesn't really, in a way, that's a good thing. It doesn't allude to exactly how old anyone is.
Yeah.
But this friendship that Iris has is kind of they come and meet each other for like two cantankerous old women.
Yes.
But with so much what keeps them together.
Yeah.
And all this was.
They always seem to know something, don't they? It's Cassandra and Iris know far more than the rest of the island know. And they always come together and have these moments, and Cassandra says, it's going to happen again. It's coming any moment. And that was really interesting. Yes?
It's almost like a telepathy between them.
A telepathy between them? That did happen a bit, didn't it? But that happened in the relationship between Min and Cassandra. God, it's beautiful. So Min's a bit magic too then, isn't she? And are you just looking at things running through family times and the repetition of things? And God damn, I want to read it again. It was really good. Yeah, gosh. Yes, please.
Luda is a bit magic too, and the accident actually unlocks that, and that's why she's able to...
That's interesting. Were you able to hear that? Luda being magic too, and the accident actually unlocking these aspects in her. What do you think of that?
Well, I agree, and Iris pulled them back from, she kind of cast a bit of a spell and pulled them back from the brink, or pulled them back from the other side, from death, and that kind of altered them too. I mean, all of this, it's very liminal. So whether she did or not, whether, Theo's a Selkie, whether the ghosts are a head injury, it's all kind of blurred. But I always viewed it as the most kind of magical option.
Because I suppose, especially in times of crisis and dilemma, like when catastrophe is happening, which seems to be when all of these magical moments are sort of happening. But we experience what we experience, and we believe what we believe in those moments. So it's I found that highly relatable and very believable that Iris would feel that. She cried seven tears into the ocean, and she brought Theophan to her. Whether it's just circumstantial that actually there was a terrible accident and he ended up washing up, you feel like you're the author of your life sometimes, and you manifest these things, pull things into you. I don't know. I liked the whole liminal aspect of it.
I'm glad.
Yeah. Now, I have another lovely question. Oh yes, can we talk about this ending? So, you've said that it's divisive, so you've been getting feedback that people are... What kind of feedback have you been getting about this ending?
Some people absolutely love the ending and have particularly messaged me to say they love the ending, which has never happened before with anything I've written. Yeah. And then other people have basically said, when's the sequel? That was not an acceptable end to this story.
So, Annie Jane, how did you feel about the ending? Actually,
I got more.
Right, yeah, interesting. Yes, whereas I was really happy with. I actually really loved the ending. I mean, I had the classical music happening and that carried. But
I need the music.
Yeah, you need the music, but I don't necessarily need it to be explained or cut and dry or closure. I'm happy to sit in that moment forever with Luda in the hole, you know, but I understand that some people actually really need to be able to put these things to bed and need to be able to understand and come to a conclusion of their investment in these characters and what's happening. And yeah, so I can understand there would be
I can say that Tristan comes back because Luda couldn't see him in the in-between, and and he wasn't there as a ghost when the other ghosts were there.
Oh my God.
It's like one line. It's one line, and yeah, not everyone's kind of twigged that that's what it means, but he comes back and he and Luda are going to live happily ever after.
I'm damn straight. Lucky for club moving forward, I need like a little basket here to throw prizes out because Sally's nailed 2 things with this book and she should be getting little because that's awesome. So yeah, he does. Oh, I'm so happy. I liked him so much. So yeah, talk us through what it felt like writing this ending, because it's incredibly emotionally intense. It really speeds up with the pace. There's if you were actually there's a hell of a lot of noise and shrieking, and outside in the environment it's all very, there's this impending storm coming. Everything is all whooshed about everywhere. So how did that feel to write that?
It felt really good.
Yeah.
And I knew that was the point it was going towards right from when I wrote that poem on my phone when I was all sleep deprived and delirious with my newborn. And I wrote that scene with Luda in the dungeon and thinking of her children and, Min in the ocean and Darcy with Theo and I think that final line where it's like, please, I see you. That was all. Oh, it might have been please, I'm sorry when I first wrote it, but otherwise that last little section that's the poem. And that was kind of my guiding light as I threw out my 150,000 words during the drafting. I knew that was where I was headed. And I kind of tweaked the lead up to that very final scene as the characters grew and things became more complex and the story evolved. But that was always my end point.
Yeah. Yeah. How did we feel about the ending?
I'm hoping they shove the priest in the hole, actually.
Hoping to shove the priest in the hole.
Iris might, but
Iris might lock him up in the hole. Yeah.
But it was, I felt it was claustrophobic.
You felt the claustrophobia of the hole?
Yeah. That whole, that almost alluded right back to the beginning where this man has dictated what is going to happen.
Yeah.
Every other village went, the whole religious side of it sided with the priest because he's always right.
Yeah.
And just shove this difficult woman here.
Yeah.
We don't want to deal with her. She must be crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how we deal with crazy.
It was interesting, I think, how it was almost bookended by big storms. When they arrived at Shawnee, they couldn't actually go to their house because there'd been this massive storm and the windows were all broken and everything. And so you knew that this was a bit of a volatile island environment. And then, of course, the terrible landslide, the erosion and the death of poor Ali. But then also at the end, we're left and the characters are waiting for that next wave of impending, environmental storms and impact and how that, I suppose, reshape this island for them again. Yeah.
The significance of men diving and the whales coming in.
Yeah.
So I wondered if that was mirroring something.
Oh, yeah. So Min seeing the whales and the whales approaching, was that mirroring something in the past? Was that a callback?
Yeah, it was kind of because the whales were also in the water when Min dived in to get Tristan and Luda out of the car accident.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's allusions to Cassandra and August and the others calling the whales into the sound
Yes.
many years ago. And I wanted them there because, you know, Min sort of searches for them and she felt let down by them with the car accident because she's like, why didn't they, you know, aren't they meant to help people in crisis? And for me, it kind of tied into Min and Iris and Cassandra doing this amazing thing and, you know, basically storming the church to rescue Luda.
Yeah.
And the whales being there, and I'm not very good at articulating it outside the story in a lot of ways. But that's sort of the threads that they were tangled up in when I was writing it.
Yeah. My mum said something really interesting. Mum, and we were talking. Oh, that's all right. I remember at 40, Mum. We were talking about the book just yesterday, and Mum was talking about the fact that when Luda's in the whole tragedy of Luda being in the hole is that she knows that she will get out, but those other women didn't. So there's some of that emotion too, like she's in there and she's experiencing and feeling the presence of these other, you know, all of the sorrow and the feeling is there in the walls, but she knows that she'll get out. Yeah, that's an interesting kind of juxtaposition of experience of those places.
But does she get out? I'm never going to stop wondering. Like,
Especially when you said you saw the haze, like all
well, she's in the hole and she's thinking about how no one's used it for 200 years and there's no ventilation and she's basically suffocating. But at the same time, these other women are coming to save her, and then it just finishes. And
Gorgeous.
and then you stop wondering, did she get out or were they too late?
I think you'd get along well with my neighbour.
Well, I think because we know that Tristan does wake up, she no longer
Well, now we
sees.
know, yeah.
Yeah, now we know.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, so Tristan wakes up. He's got to recover a bit. He's been in a coma. It's all been very.
It's had a rough trot.
It's had a rough
That's Tristan.
Yeah, but if the women don't rescue her, you can be damn sure that Tristan will go and get her out because he's that kind of lad. But I think the women get her out. I think Cassandra and Iris and Min. Min's not going to let her mum stay in there. No way. Min will pull her out. Oh, Violet, absolutely. Yeah. She's got a big crew that's going to get her out of that hole, I think.
She's got a crew.
She's got a crew. Yeah. So just something else that I found interesting was the love story between Theophan and Darcy. It was so palpable. It was really, really authentic. And I had to keep reminding myself that I was reading about adolescent, young men. It just was such a mature, beautiful connection that they had. And I wondered, how was that to write this love story? And how did it feel to be writing a love story that's outside of your own gender experience? Does that bring any challenges, or is it still, because you're writing love, it just unfolds? Or I just wondered about that.
I think because it was a world where there were it's called queer normal, in the world that I wrote Salt and Skin in. It was, queerness is just accepted by everyone, which is wonderful. And that made it feel okay to write those characters, because I'm not trying to write realistic lived experience of someone, living in the northern suburbs of Melbourne, coming out to their parents or whatever, because that's not my lived experience. And I think as well, because it was just who they were, they just loved each other, and I was just being true to the characters, I think. But yeah, it was something that I did grapple with it, and I have a lot of queer friends that I kind of chatted to as I was writing it. and, read little bits of it and that sort of thing. But I really loved writing about Darcy and Theo.
Yeah. It was beautiful. Really, I reckon it was one of the best love stories I've read in a while, actually. It was beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any more questions for Eliza? Because I was going to see if you would be able to read a passage to us, but
yes.
Before you do that, does anyone else? Yes, Lisa.
When you said, you really during the editing phase, you had to cut down quite a lot of it for it to be what we have today.
Yes.
Did you find that was sort of spread evenly throughout the novel, or did you find that you ended up sort of pulling more from the latter part of the novel? I did wonder, as I was frantically trying to finish the book before I went to work one day, I started sweating and my heart was beating because I wanted them to have a happy ending, and then they did, and then we got to the ending and I just sat there and I turned to my roommate and I was like, what? Get dressed and go to work now. How do I face the day? Exactly.
That was this morning.
Yeah.
I was like, what? Yeah. It was such a tumult of emotions, and I just wonder, how did that
Did you just say a tumour of emotion? Tumult. Oh, yeah, tumour of emotion. Yeah. It's so true, isn't it? Because I was at home when I finished the book, and I wouldn't have liked to have had to go to work because people, I would be like, here's your book, all right, enjoy it. Good, right? I hope you know how you are loved.
That's a really good question, and it was actually mostly at the start of the book that I took out most of the 150,000 words.
I don't feel like anything's missing though, so well done.
It was slow. It was saggy. And I think it's Neil Gaiman that says that often, the first draft, or in my case, like the first 500 drafts, are you telling a story to yourself, and then you are then able to kind of turn it into something palatable for other people.
I say that. Yeah, I've read that. Yes.
But it was mostly the earlier parts I ended up taking a lot out, because I think the last probably third just kind of whizzed along, and didn't. I mean, it needed tweaking and it needed other kinds of work, but it wasn't that kind of straight ripping out of scenes and paragraphs and just discarding.
Oh, that's a good question. Were there any characters removed? Were there any auxiliary characters that just got chopped?
Well, originally Theo was actually Bran's ward. She was another person on the council, and then it was just a bit too. It was getting a bit too. There's enough characters in there, and my poor editors. They'd read the latest draft and they'd be like, "Well, we haven't heard anything from Min for about 80 pages. What's been happening with Min?" So kind of rolling Iris and Bran into one character worked well. I think Ewan got carved back a lot. He was a bit more active in the story in earlier drafts, and then he kind of ended up taking a bit more of a background role. I think that's there was a the very, very early draft, Luda traveled with the uncle of her late husband's brother came with them, and he ended up getting the chop.
Yeah. So with the editing process, because I do like to ask this question actually, because I'm fascinated by the idea of having to kill your darlings. Were there any darlings that you had to kill when you were editing, and also was there anything that you had to fight for with your editors?
I mean, I found the editing process, it was intense, but it was so joyful and respectful and wonderful. And I was so grateful to work with the people that I did at Ultimo. One thing that was discussed taking out was Theo with his finger webbing and him chopping it and getting all angsty about his finger webbing. There were discussions about removing that, but I really wanted to keep it.
Yeah, I'm glad you did. I think so. That was, because, that was a massive expression for him, and such a contrast to him, having this luminous, scar-free skin to then having this, trauma with his hands, and that he was quite debilitated by his hands at times. And
self-harm is such a huge problem, though, with people like teenagers and old,
self-harm.
Yeah.
Were you able to hear that, Eliza?
Yeah, it is. It's a huge issue.
Yeah.
Kids that look perfectly happy and beautiful on the outside are going home and doing stuff.
Yeah.
And covering it up and covering it as well.
Yeah. That was so beautiful, wasn't it, when Darcy is reflecting and he realises that he's the only one who's ever really seen Theophane's hands. I thought that was so beautiful.
Ewan was the first person who cut them.
Yes, Ewan was the first person who cut them. Yeah. But in terms of once he was living on the island and trying to be a part of the society there, he always kept his hands covered. Yeah, except he'd revealed them to Darcy.
And he found Theo on the island because there's this whole thing about witches not being able to cross water. So part of the kind of hinted at mythology is that, Cassandra and Iris have just been trapped on Big Island, and she couldn't actually cross the causeway. She couldn't get across the water to the island to get this little Selkie child that she'd called up from the depths.
Yeah.
Is it because of climate change that in the old days they would have been able to walk across to the ghost house, but because of climate change it's now cut off and covered by water?
Yeah. Wow. Does anyone? I'm really bad with time. Like I just could talk forever. How are we going?
Love it.
Yeah, I know. All right. So, does anyone have any final questions before we ask Eliza to read for us? Yes.
I just wanted to ask about the father. Like, I know he didn't do a lot of great things.
Joshua, is that Josh?
No, father, like the.
Oh, Father Lee. Was that his name, Father Lee? Yeah.
I honestly don't remember his name because he was that much. Yeah. But did he have good intentions, or was he just a bit of a dick, like Cassandra said? Like,
He was just a bit of a dick. The previous father, Father Frank, had been wonderful, and a lot of people kind of still attended worship because of nostalgia. And part of Iris, the reason Iris was still hanging in there with him was because she hoped that he would settle into the role and become someone like Father Frank. So Father Frank was the one who, when Theo was locked in the cupboard in the Kirk and didn't want to go back in, basically reassured Iris that, he will when he's ready and it's fine, and don't pressure him. Whereas by contrast, you've got Father Lee, stealing his precious bit of sea glass and trying to force him to enter the Kirk and turning up when Iris isn't there and just bullying him.
Yeah, manipulation, wasn't it? He was trying to manipulate Theo. He was trying to manipulate the town against Luda. He was the one who orchestrated getting her into the hole. Yeah.
He couldn't manipulate Cassandra, though.
No, he couldn't manipulate Cassandra. She knew so much more than he ever could know. Yeah, gosh. Well, would you be able to read to us? I love being read to.
I'm going to be a little bit indulgent, seeing as everyone has read the book and I don't have to read from the start of it. Luda feels the hands, brutal male hands, trying to push her into the hole, but she fights and claws and tears. She is vicious and she is strong. The men wrap her up in an old woolen blanket so that she cannot hurt them, cannot fight. She is roughly shoved into the dark of the hole. She is given a torch and a plastic bottle of juice. Just until the storms pass, the quiet, scared voices tell her. Shh, says Father Lee. No, yells Iris, her voice very loud but not loud enough. Let her go, let her out of there. You're safe, Father Lee calls in to Luda, but his hands are the roughest of all. His torch skitters across the inside of the walls, countless marks in the stone layered on top of each other into a constellation of nameless terror and hope. Luda thinks that this is what she's been dreaming of, not the car, not the water, this. Perhaps there had been better ventilation once, but the hole had not been used in 200 years. The ghosts from the tidal island have followed her here, all of them. The space is filled with them, their murmuring voices, their rough hands, except for Tristan of the in-between. He is not here, and the women, the witches, they are not here either. There is only the woman with the long dark hair who looks like Iris. Just wait, the woman says now. The hands. Luda has never seen her up this close, and then she disappears. Luda shivers. She tries to breathe. The causeway to Shawnee is washed away. The small bay where Theo was found, where the 3 whales died, is chewed away by the frothing, storm-flared waves. The caravan is blown onto its side. The ghost house itself begins to lose its roof slate by slate tile. Witch markings laid open to a howling sky. Earth gives way to churning salt water. Theo and Darcy, hunting for Luda, shelter in the ruins of the long-fallen houses that had once kept the ghost house company. The wind whistles like something living. A lone cormorant flies in place, buffeted and screaming. Cassandra's head hurts. The wind is tidal when it's like this, waves of it crashing over the rooftops and streets, the drag of it back out to the sea over and over. They have come for her, as she knew they would, the women who have long visited her silently in the space between sleeping and waking. The 4 of them, her 4, who had pushed her and Iris out through the window of the ghost house so that they would be spared. Oh, how she has wept and raged for them, how they had given her this, the sum of their love and power all woven together, bringing her to this moment, bringing her, both her and Iris, to this moment. August, her beautiful bright August, long dark hair, the same clever loving eyes as Iris, the same impatience. She is not impatient now. Tristan barely there, being pulled back now. He is the only one who speaks, and his voice is barely audible above the clawing of the storm. Every part of him an ache, a yearning. Help her. The spirits of the women buoy Cassandra from her seat like a tide. It is like being swept in the deep. For a moment she is swimming. She will let them carry her like rushing water. She will let them carry her down the hill and along the road to the thick doors of the kirk. They will leave her then, or maybe they won't. Perhaps they will charge in with her. She hopes so. Their raft turning the stale air inside the kirk into something writhing. Cassandra can feel Min's fierceness. She can feel Iris, her distress, her fury. She and Min and Iris and all those women who travel with her. Luda counting witch marks in the dark. But not for long. She knows they will succeed in this. She is sure of it. She can feel the certainty of it in her breath, her skin, her muscles, the rhythm of blood and old, old bones. She will do this final thing with Iris, with Min, with all of them, her last night before she finally joins them. She focuses the dungeon, yes. The kirk. She steps out into the raw, is carried, breathes in and tastes the sea. Min moving now more quickly. Iris as steady and ferocious as a building storm. She is sure.
That was beautiful. Cassandra, we've loved it. We've thoroughly enjoyed this book. It's been fabulous.
Thank you.
Cassandra was in love with August, wasn't she? Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I knew that, but I'd kind of forgotten. But that's just reminded me.
There's a lot in this book.
A lot in this book, yeah. Yeah. Have you been enjoying the talks and promotion that you've been doing for this book?
I have.
Yeah.
It's always such an astonishing privilege to have people talk to you about your work. Like, it always flabbergasts me. So thank you so much for having me. And thank you for picking Salt and Skin for your book club.
Yeah, thank you so much for writing it. It's been a fabulous book. What is next for you? What are you doing now? What are you working on at the moment?
I'm in the very final stages of my PhD, which is due in the next couple of weeks.
Woo!
And I've got about 5 manuscripts on the go, and I'm not quite sure which one I'm going to sort of settle into next, but it'll be a book kind of similar to Salt and Skin, I think, just set across the 2 places and drawing on history and folklore, because I just had an absolute ball with Salt and Skin.
And you do it really well, so yes, I think that's a good idea. You should do more of that. It's great. And we'll have to get you back. We'll have to get you back with the book club. Yeah, well, any final questions for Eliza before we finish up? No? Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I understand with daylight savings time, it's quite late where you are at the moment, so thanks for giving us your time this evening.
Thank you so much.
Had a lot of fun. This was such a wonderful book to read. There's been such great discussion around this book, and you've been so wonderful with your responses to our questions about your book, so thank you for unpacking it with us.
Thank you.
Cannot wait to read what comes next from you. So thanks so much, Eliza.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone.
And we will awkwardly sign off the tech now. So and have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much, Eliza.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great night.
Good night. And thank you so much to everyone who watched the live stream. Grunt is the next book. So November is our last month this year for doing book club. Craig Silvey is going to join us in person here at 6 Degrees in November, so Wednesday the 30th, so make sure you come. That'll be our last one for the year. We're going to have a little bit of a celebration together, hopefully. I'm going to bake a cake, so we'll see how that goes. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks. Only coughed a couple of times. Okay.